Next session, we have discussion on the-
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
It's Karen.
I can't. I can't recognize anybody. You know, it's terrible.
Well, we have seen each other's full faces. Now we're only seeing half.
But I have to remember that. That's
Right.
the other part.
And we didn't know how tall each other were. Or short or whatever.
Way too many visual clues missing. Okay, perfect. I'll go ahead and get rolling. We have two people who wandered out, but thank you for being here. I'm so unused to conference protocols with this. This is my first time in like 2 years, probably.
Yeah.
So I apologize if I'm doing anything that makes you feel threatened by disease spread or anything like that. I did the most, just to show you my level of preparation and relaxation, I dumped the can of Diet Coke onto my lap. So I will continue sitting for the entire presentation. I was fortunate, you know, they got me a stool so I don't have to stand. But now it's sort of a required piece of material. So thank you for helping me improvise back into, you know, the old practices of sitting and talking to a room full of people. I'm really excited that you're here today. I do have to spend the first 90 seconds of the presentation disappointing all of you. And Paula Shiska-Kabilius, the director of the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern, who is supposed to be my co-presenter, cannot be with us today. And she feels bad. She has an 80 slide deck. We've been working on that, but she's not going to be able to talk about that today. And that was going to be a lot of the heavy lifting about the research around talent development. And so my name is Chris Kolberg. My role in the big picture here is that I'm serving on some of the committees for STEM STL on identifying and filling gaps, as well as talking about measurement. Formerly worked for the state of Illinois in math and science education, where I did statewide evaluation of programs, looking at effectiveness and and I also did research on long-term outcomes of students who had specialized STEM tracks in education, particularly from specialized STEM high schools. More recently, I was director of research evaluation and assessment for Palo Alto School District out in California. I've returned back to the Midwest. I grew up here, and so my kids are all out of the house. My parents are getting kind of old, and so here I am. Now, what was awesome was I've spent the last year and a half now in just kind of bombing Zoom meetings, and because I had to prepare for my eventual arrival, and so that's how I got involved with STEM STL. Was that I started showing up in some of these strategic planning meetings, and I was the weird independent guy in the back of the virtual Zoom room. And but it's been really exciting because a lot of the work that I've done in my own professional history has focused on system-wide change with a particular focus and emphasis on STEM education. And so I found the right crew. So what I'm doing today, what my plan was today, as we start to look at implementation of the new strategic plan. And by the way, can all of you hear me? Okay, sorry. I will want to make sure. As we start moving into the area of implementation of the strategic plan for STEM STL, one of the things that keeps me going over the weekend is the idea that this is the opportunity for us to write some of the measurable outcomes. Because for me, that is, first of all, exciting. But second of all, I think you know this, that if you're writing and putting down and committing to outcomes on paper before a project starts, then that's a very powerful step, not only to do, but the fact that you're participating in that, you have a lot of leverage because you're really determining what the conversation is going to look like on the other side of a year of effort. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I'll be referencing the literature, and Paula will be coming back to one of our either monthly roundtables or we will have a chance to hear from her because she is much more interesting than I am. But what I am going to do is talk a little bit about the talent development model that she and my research has worked with for the last 5 or so years. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that overlays with STEM STL strategic plan. And new people, if you're not comfortable with me demasking, please give me a sign. I don't know what the protocol is. So we'll be talking about STEM STL, how this talent development model overlays it, and how it might inform some of our conversations about filling gaps. One of the first things that people kept wanting to talk about was a dashboard. We need a dashboard. There's got to be a dashboard. And the dashboard is 2 steps after you've gone through the process of identifying your theories of change and identifying what you're going to measure in terms of outcomes. So that's really trying to frame a conversation that we haven't had yet. And so I hope you weren't expecting today that I have a roadmap planned out for where things are going, but I do want to let you know what some of the conversations are going to be like going forward. I want to test it out with you to see if it makes sense. And, and I believe in iterative processes. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense to talk about. And I know that I've parachuted in from California where everything is always sunny and golden and wonderful, except for the fires. And, and so I need to take some time hearing from you all, the things that might be assumptions that I make that are incorrect. Good with that? Okay, sorry. It's been so long. I just had like 2 years of preamble stuck inside my head and just needed to get out. So this is what I just summarized, is really just 3 simple steps that we're going to be walking through. Now, what's really, to me, interesting is my background's in educational psychology. And so for me, what is interesting as we talk about the STEM STL ecosystem is that, what are we really talking about with respect to the students as they pass through these experiences? For me, it was really important that we take some time and say, okay, these are some models of development that are going to be crucial for us to have as a common understanding as we talk about students who are moving through informal education opportunities, out of school time opportunities, as well as the traditional PK-12 or PK, or PK-20, and then you merge that with the career readiness and workplace readiness components. And so we have people who are working from a lot of different domains of expertise. And so one of the things that that everybody doesn't share is the same kind of understanding of how a child's brain grows that you have when you've been through an education program. So let me pause for a second. How many of you are educators or from K-12? Okay, how many of you from OST, museums, nonprofits? Okay, and who have I missed? Sir?
I'm with the nonprofit.
Okay, very good. And you?
Business.
Business. Oh, the business. So, this is exactly one of the things that struck me was that we are people who are coming from different areas, and for us to start talking about what some of these outcomes are going to be, we need to start determining what our vocabulary is right up front. And and I've worked with people who are working across these sectors. And so the first thing I want to do is make sure that we don't have a frustrating 2021 to 22 where we're talking past one another and not necessarily about the same things. So, and I missed this morning, there's a long story about my furnace, but it all blends together with part of what the main topics, one of the main topics this morning, which is college, career, and life readiness, CCLR. One of the things that when we talk about workplace and we talk about community colleges is an understanding of when students are capable of starting to look at those decisions. And you will not be surprised to hear that the research is pushing that kind of decision-making and cutting those conversations further forward in the student's experience. I spent a lot of the last year in California working on rewriting college and career readiness so that it started in 6th grade with the Gallup Strengths Finder. The goal being that by the end of 7th grade, every kid knows what their strengths are and they can talk about it when they start to organize, and as we move toward more project-based learning within the kids. And so, but they're, within the context that this is all happening, what I also found was that the parents, there were a large number of parents who were excluded from the system and excluded from the conversation. I will tell you this, a lot of the districts I work with are kind of affluent middle class, generally not diverse in terms of its racial or ethnic composition. And you can't, you can start to think about college saving maybe, when the kids are freshmen and sophomores when they officially roll it out. But the truth of the matter is you need a much longer runway. So there are several conversations that I've been having that were kind of surprising, which is the people who benefited the most from enhancing some of the conversation at the middle school level were in fact the families that have the least access to resources or that were less likely to have a lot of direct experience with higher education. And so, and what we didn't want to do was turn it into one of those grade grubbing arms races now. That these sixth graders now have a new concern that they're not smart enough to get into whatever the Wash U. But instead start getting them to think in terms where they begin to see the logic between the courses that they're taking, things like class schedules, and things like their interests. So a lot of what we talk about, in kind of moving it through the ecosystem. So here's my quick side note. A lot of the talent development literature, if you Google this and you Google some of the names that are in here, will lead you back to discussions about gifted and talented. And I've worked in that area for 20-something years. And let me tell you, that's not a lot of fun because it has some systemic problems in its origin. I worked in a school district that had 2 middle schools, Turman and Jordan, who are named after the founders of the American Eugenics Movement. And it took over a year to convince people that that was a bad idea for our students to have these names on schools. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that talent development, a lot of the impetus came from areas of trying to find and foster higher performance among students. And, and how do we turn somebody who has the capacity or an ability, how do we turn that into something that they're acting upon and actually expressing through their life and their work? Now, I want to set that, to some degree aside, because I've spent the last 6 years talking about how to take these talent development models and bring them more into a general education situation and working with diverse populations. Paula would be able to tell you at great length about her program that she runs in Evanston Township in Chicago that focuses on a minority urban population and is trying to bring a lot of these same things here. That was what she was going to bring to the conversation. And I don't present other people's slides, so you're just gonna have to look at me, wave my hand. And again, if you were here from the very beginning, I apologize greatly for being the less entertaining and edifying half of the presentation. And this is the old school thinking, which is, well, smart kids, can take care of themselves. Well, that's kind of maybe true if you live in a highly resourced location where they have access to enriched libraries, educational experiences, if the parents can drive them to something on the weekend, every other weekend. But it's not true for students that are systematically being left out of the conversation. I think that, for me, it's an immense amount of talent that is being passed up. And I also know that without diversity of viewpoint in a lot of these conversations, you wind up having Silicon Valley bro culture, which I just escaped. And I don't think that does us any good in the long term. So this is something, so to start to talk about how we're going to be framing things that are coming from the committee, I think it's important to kind of look at this chart for a minute. And this chart is probably one of the most common sense charts that you might ever see. And what it's showing is that for different domains, and in this case, it's talking about music, sports, and then a general kind of academics, that the progression of a student as they physically, their cognitive development, doesn't always necessarily match when they have opportunities to find and express talents and skills. And so one of the things that interests me is that as we look at finding, identifying, and filling gaps, and we talk about mentorship programs and we talk about out of school time programs, this begins to give us an idea of things that we can focus on. Now, what does this tell you? Well, look, it's such an easy example. Let's say your kid is really good at gymnastics. And from the age of 5, they flip and twirl. And so, there's a kind of a standard narrative for, the fact that you take them to classes and then they eventually need a private coach maybe. And then eventually they begin to look at finding somebody who begin to seriously train them, develop and fine tune those skills. The same for pretty much any athletic pursuit. Now, the same model applies within the field of music. you've got somebody who, is a piano prodigy. And so what you're doing is you're taking them and you are saying, well, what are the right opportunities for them right now to go to the next step? Now, here's what's missing from a lot of that talk. And that is the idea that, is the kid happy? Is the child experiencing some sort of love and joy? And so a lot of what's talked about is a first stage, and I guess that's really to the left of the, the place where it says start, is being purposeful about talking and thinking about how you're building this idea of love into the curriculum itself. Because that's going to be the thing, initiating interest in something, you have to let the person know, let the child know that it exists. To sustain that, you need to put it within a set of human relationships. So you're not just saying, we want to be an astronaut, go to the science center, but you're beginning to talk about how the fact that someone becomes an astronaut, goes to the moon, through a much larger series of relationships and what's the word I'm looking for? They're reliant on other people, but more importantly, this is often pursued by people who truly love what they're doing. And, and I think that that's really important. I have 4 kids who are all in their 20s. And let me tell you what, none of this actually was very useful as I was raising them, because they will do whatever, and they all like and pursue totally different things. But the important thing is that I could see when there were things that they truly loved, because then that continued work is self-initiated. I don't really like, I think you probably heard about Duckworth and the concept of grit. And I'm not really a fan of grit, because I would rather us design environments that do not put students in some sort of a threat or adversarial or deficit relationship in the first place. And, and I don't think it's trauma informed, and I don't think it's really, equitable. And, and so, kind of coming back to this chart then, to land it in something that's in reality, is that we kind of have built up as people an intuitive understanding of how some the tracks or the pathways that some people take through a certain number of, I'm going to say, stereotypical, talent development cycles. The young musicians, the athletes who maybe won't peak in their field, in their discipline, until they're physically peaking, for those requirements as well. And the same is true for academics. So one of the big changes that's happened over the last couple of years with the publication of the white paper that I'm going to give you the link to, that Paula is going to be presenting, one of the big changes is recognizing that all of these things that we've studied and researched about elite performance can actually be shifted over into normal, I shouldn't say general, into a normal education setting. And what that does is that gives us the opportunity to interact with students in a different way and start to activate their interest, their curiosity, and the energy that they naturally can bring to something that they really care about. And so, that's really what we've been talking about, is how do we take that? And the people involved in some of the work we've got the head psychologist of U.S. track and field. We've got the guy at NASA who figures out how people from different cultures don't kill one another when locked in a space station for a year. And there are a lot of different areas where people have gone pretty deep, but this is an amazing opportunity, and especially with the way that the ecosystem is framed, the coordination, the systemic nature of all the opportunities here. It's an opportunity to kind of couch it in some of this research-based language and start to look at it as a blueprint. And I know blueprint is already a blueprint, so I should have thought longer about a different word to use than that. So here's here's a couple specifics. Is that as we move forward, children are increasingly domain specific in terms of, their interest. And, there's one thing about liking dinosaurs. There's another thing when you get into middle school, you're starting to learn real biology, and you get into high school and you find out what paleontology is, and, as we see that progression through, the research tells us that a lot of the learning does not occur in the school itself. And so I'm really heartened to hear one of the areas that Paul and I looked at was, what is the value of a research and mentorship experience for adolescents when they're in high school and they're interested in pursuing science? Well, it's huge, and so the question is, well, how can we begin to bring in some of that mentorship type of experience? When we talk about internships, how do we ignite in the students that passion that comes from seeing somebody doing what they're thinking about, but in the real world? When they all of a sudden realize that's a job that you could have in the world. And so I think that how this flips back to STEM STL is that we're in the process right now of trying to say, well, how do we take an inventory of what the St. Louis ecosystem offers, how well it's doing? And I think that part of what we need to do is add a few things that maybe haven't been part of the conversation before. Do we need to make sure that out-of-school experiences have a developmentally appropriate framework, for the students that are going through their programs? And I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. But I will tell you this, that out of the 80 or so programs evaluated, the ones that have been going for a while, the hardest conversation is to sit down and ask them what they do. And the second most difficult conversation is say, well, just what's your goal? Because a lot of times there's so much emphasis on delivery, service delivery, that you forget really what your larger outcomes are. So coming back around this framework, when we talk about talent development, this committee is going to focus on using that language to talk about the coordination between in-school, out-of-school, business, and higher education, making sure that we're all working on things that are, I guess, filling the gaps. That's what are you all following me? I'm sorry, this is not really very interactive. My interaction was saying, okay, now Paul is going to show you the cool stuff. And I'm going to be low key. And I think we know opportunities are not distributed evenly, that's a whole other matter of, St. Louis itself has a very complex and sad, disappointing history. And it was weird. I've been gone for 25 years. And so I've had to do a lot of, self-reflection on, what is it that came from me that I carried with me all this time, and I'm coming back now. And so sorry for, this is like I said, my first time in front of a group. I may as well also have like a couch here and let me tell you about, how hard it's been. But the point being that, I think it goes beyond taking account of the number of programs that we have, but being really smart about how we view them, such as I've got a relative who works for the Department of Transport, and they take a look at GIS, which you think is about to become the easiest thing to get free advice on in the city of St. Louis. There are ways that they can look at how painful is it or how inconvenient is it for a person to get from point A, neighborhood A, to point B, like the science center, and so we need to start thinking, about some of the very practical components of our environment also, and I think that when we talk about filling gaps and we talk about improving the ecosystem, I don't want to leave things like that off, and I think it should be part of the conversation from the start, and so this, and again, the conversation that I missed earlier about college and career and life readiness, it's been really fascinating because when it comes time to talk about things like employment outlook and jobs outlook, I'm in so many meetings where the business world and the education world don't really know how to talk to one another. And what I mean by that is that trying to see the future is itself difficult, and trying to predict what children are going to need in order to enter the job market in 10 years. I can't do that. Nobody can do that. And so, the question then is, well, what kind of opportunities, and can we structure the opportunities in such a way that they will benefit the student and help them in terms of their development and learning and passion, regardless of what the final end goal is. 10 years ago, we weren't talking about GIS. And now I really hope that every school has a GIS club. That's my personal thing, like that around. So I think that we need to also, understand that there's patience involved. There is, sometimes a mismatch in the way that we talk about things, but I think if we can have a common reference, and again, talk about this in terms of STEM talent development within the ecosystem, then that gives us a real opportunity for talking. And okay, everybody wants a dashboard. I don't think everybody here is fired up about the dashboard concept as maybe other meetings that I've been in, but let me tell you about what you have to do before we get to the point of having a dashboard, because eventually we're going to have a dashboard. And what we need to do right now is step back and practice a lot of something that's called logic modeling, or theory of change, which is really the business version is critical thinking and strategic planning. The bottom line is we need to start to have common language in the way that we talk about the outcomes of our projects. When we're talking about a collective impact model, and we have a large number of very diverse programs with diverse goals, we need to start talking about how we knit these together. And we need to start talking about what the ecosystem's goals are. And and some of this is moving past just saying how many kids came to a workshop. One of the things that I've been trying to lean on people to do is collect the students' names and birthdays of participants in programs. The reason for birthdays is that if we can get a release from the parents, we can use that information to track them as they go through K-12 and into higher education. If our ultimate goal is to have students going to community colleges, 2-year and 4-year colleges, to study science and things that they will actually do to feed themselves in the world, then we can't have that after high school be a black box. And there are ways to do that. That was part of what Paul and I did with 27 schools. We tracked down a lot of graduates 8 years later and used existing resources to find out, well, did you become a science major? And that's going to, and here's the difficult part, is that sometimes our outcomes are so far in the distance that we know that we can kind of hypothetically ask the question, but we know that we're never really going to get to the point where we know whether a middle school intervention helped kids stick with their love of science until they went to college. But those are the kinds of things that we need to start asking. Those are the things that it would be very useful to find out that something that we assume is having a great benefit is not actually delivering the results. So flashback, Palo Alto, very popular tutoring program, and people had all kinds of great intentions. I mean, the district was putting a lot of money into it. And because I'm the data guy, I have to deliver the bad news that the students in the program were just as likely to regress than move forward, in math. And so maybe, I think right now we don't know what matters. Okay. Thank God the standardized testing has now kind of been shown to be a self-fulfilling, set of practices. And right now we have a moment to say, okay, we're going to set those things aside. And this is true whether or not we're in schools, business, or we're in the higher ed world, or we run community services and nonprofits. Now's the time for us to begin to take a look at some of the assumptions in our models and maybe try to move past them. We need to put aside deficit-based models. We need to put aside models that assume that the shared outcome of everyone is some sort of, generic middle-class person with a small business, because that's not what humanity is like. That's not what our community is like. Turns out that's not what Palo Alto is like. Here's something for you. I was trying to get Palo Alto to partner more with the community college in town, Foothill De Anza. And I was actually in a board meeting, board member said, we don't want to talk about community colleges. That's not, our students, intended outcome. Well, the #1 full-time, first-time enrolling institution of Palo Alto Unified School District is Foothill College. That's after they graduate, that's full-time, the semester after they have their high school diploma, 15% of them are across town at Foothill College. Now, and I love that. I love that because it tells me that students are finding their way, parents are finding their way, and now it's really kind of up to us. When we talk about finding and filling gaps, we're going to need to have some difficult conversations. We're going to need to be honest with one another, and we're going to need to put in the work of, stepping back, identifying, and then measuring the things that we say are important. So that was really just an overview of, this part of STEM STL. These two areas, and I don't know if they're initiatives or activity groups, the names are weird. But the bottom line is that a large part of what what is going to be driving the conversation from identifying and filling gaps is going to be based upon trying to have this conversation be around a shared model. I think that it was really exciting, the idea that we could have community collaboration on this as a project. And I think it'll bring all of our different areas into much better alignment, which is really the best thing that we can do. So having said that, and I would like to know, and this is the hard part, is walking into the room with the people who were here before I got off the plane. And that is, so where do you feel like this resonates? Where do you feel like this misses the mark? Have you been involved with STEM STL and, some of the committees? I'm trying to get a gauge now. I've just talked at you for a half hour. I'm just trying to get a gauge of where you're at and whether or not you feel like this intersects with the work that you're doing. Yes.
So I'm Sally Defani. I am the special school district of St. Louis County. So we're a huge district. We provide special ed and tech ed services to St. Louis County students. And so we have 2 technical high schools. So what you were saying about we really work on providing our students with a lot of work-based learning in our technical programs because it really enhances what we're teaching. And so as you were talking about just exposing them, I don't know what term you use, real world learning, making connections for them, providing industry mentors. I mean, that's a big part of what we do at our tech schools. Yeah, so that's I just wanted to, the other thing that you mentioned that resonated for me was kind of like customizing the experience as a student progresses. And so just like within our tech schools, we really start off with more generalized experiences that first year. Our programs are 2 years. And then that senior year, really trying to tailor what we're exposing and providing for that student based on their interests. So, and then you also mentioned, you specifically said going to college, like 2 or 4 year colleges, I think at one point. Are you also going to be looking at students who decide to go straight into employment after graduation? If it's a STEM, like a technical type career.
Yeah, and I think the terminology, the one that I'm using is college career and life readiness.
Okay.
And so it is, it does try to include the, the concept that people are going to choose to do what they want to do without the assistance of any kind of formal institution. That's child number 3 of mine. And so, one of the things that I left out that I also think is really important is the social emotional learning dimension of this. And things like the tech schools, they engage students in a different way because all of a sudden it makes sense to them. The number of students I've seen who finished our high school at community college because they didn't have to put up with the high school BS. That alone tells me that we should double the number of dual enrollment programs.
I think there's a lot of students who graduate because they came to one of our tech schools who would not have graduated.
Yes.
If they had stayed in their comprehensive high school.
Yeah, and I think that's why, if we have a shared focus on lifetime learning, not just the skills, but also, that they're engaged in those conversations about, the larger question about how they fit into the big picture, how they fit into society. We still haven't come up with any kind of great societal revelation or insight from COVID. And that's very sad. And I was just too foolish to think that something might happen. But I think that we can start to craft some of the conversations afterwards. Yes.
We are part of Wings of Hope, and it's a mainly a medical transport and relief organization, but we also have a STEM program that's heavily based on aviation. And we want to get kids, especially of diverse backgrounds, into the field so that we can have more pilots out there, more mechanics and engineers. But my question is, and this could be for the group, is that you mentioned about monitoring kids after they go through the program and seeing how we track them in the future. We've been trying to think of some sort of maybe even social media aspect to get our students in a group setting, and then we can chat with them 4 or 5 years later after they get done with the group, seeing where they're at now, see if they can help or anything. Is there any sort of social media aspect that you guys are thinking of? Because all we can think of is Facebook, and kids don't like Facebook anymore.
To touch on what you said, I love the whole presentation. I of course come from my diverse background. I'm from Black sciences, and I grew up at a math and science magnet school. I did St. Louis Science Center, UT. I was supposed to go to STLCC, but decided to follow my different path. But social media, Instagram for sure. Instagram is like doing everything. Even my advisors and some of my supervisors from St. Louis Science Center contact me on Instagram all the time. I mean, they're like, sorry to be informal, but we love you and we're happy that you decided to stick through the science and follow through. But I really like the presentation because it hit on the points where, like, to me, everything you said pretty much was something I had already experienced through, and me and my family, we've had those conversations, but not to be like super throughout Black, but like Black people have been having these conversations for a really long time, but I'm really happy that they're starting to broaden into white spaces, because these are things that, some educated like what community have already been trying to get acknowledged of, like you said, finally got rid of standardized testing, thank God. We're not making, when I was a kid, they say, they tell us we can go to community colleges and go to these tech programs because they not necessarily think you can afford it, but they know your background. But not emphasizing that, hey, Pfizer is here, and if you go to this tech program, we can get you a job. Right out of the program, 4-month to 10-month program, you could be making $50,000 a year. Like, that was just my take on it. Like you said, you have to follow through, one, and then start it early, like you said in your presentation. You started them at adolescence, education, math, science, whatever, academics, it wasn't about, you didn't start that in middle or high school, like a lot of schools do. You have to start it from the bottom and get it all the way up to like science. Like so many of my friends graduated STEM degrees. But I know some of my friends that didn't go to magnet schools that have no interest at all in academic fields in general. So I think it's annoying because like, why do only magnet school students have a higher percent, at least at SLPS, have a higher percent of STEM jobs or STEM interests? So I'm really happy that these conversations were made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Nash Demian. I'm the programs manager at Moving Hope, and I've been monitoring and evaluation as well.
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sorry. My name is Nash Demian. I'm the program manager for Moving Hope, and I'm monitoring and evaluation as well. And our STEM is different kind of STEM. As Nick, he's our lead teacher, is in aviation. My biggest struggle, because I have a logic model, is how to reach my impact in St. Louis and outside St. Louis, because aviation is an expensive field to go into. And especially there's so many resources out there for our students, especially the females. They can get fully scholarship into the aviation, and aviation shouldn't be just a pilot, but also mechanics and A&P in so many ways. That is my hardest thing, and I do agree about the mentorship, because we have a mentorship program. Each student do have a one-on-one mentor, and that mentor is a pilot or mechanic. So we link those students with their interests with that mentor, and they plan the career planning template for them. But still, it's so hard to track that impact in 5 years because it's very costly. And also, students would just do the different careers away from aviation, but stay into the engineering.
Tracking the long-term outcomes is a challenge. There are some useful tools. Any accredited institution that accepts financial aid is part of a national student clearinghouse. And so you can capture something like 97% of student enrollments that way. What was interesting, and this is about learning about Missouri, was that in Illinois, we did a long-term study that looked at 20, 30 years to see how many of them emigrated out of state. And what we found was that we were the largest exporter of high school graduates in the country back in 2009, meaning that we had a lot of kids, we were investing a lot of money in giving them good education, and then they were going to Iowa or somewhere else that had a more attractive offer. Now, and so I've kind of every once in a while, and if there's anybody here who has a good connection with the state, that would be one of the ultimate questions that we want to ask. If we're taking a regional approach to this, then you're exactly right. We need to find out the different endpoints that people do reach, because it's not just going and getting a degree in aviation from like University of Illinois. It's in so I think that process where we sit down, where we talk about what we're offering, when we say, we have mentorship programs, again, in a variety of disciplines, and that's when we begin to start and say, look, we're not going to know for sure for a while, but here are our best hypotheses about how this is going to work. This is what we're going to be checking on. And, and then comes the work of having to report it back every 2 or so years. And so, something like your work, you're right, it draws on STEM and a huge variety of other fields. And I'm kind of excited to know you exist. That's really
What
cool.
ages do you work with?
Middle school, high school.
Middle school and high school?
My biggest struggle is the middle school or a little bit younger. They don't have the engagement because we're talking about like a big vocabs, but the most results that I got from high schoolers, they get really engaged and they actually go to the aviation.
our biggest struggle this past year was the pandemic.
Yeah.
Trying to get kids to be engaged over Zoom.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you all have felt the same pain. But this year we're when our groups meet again in April and in November, we actually get to get the kids in person this year with masks and in the hangars, working on the plane. It's going to be awesome.
And that's an important moment to
Yeah.
note, and that is, in addition to our frustration as adults, these kids have been like going mad, locked in their rooms with tablets. So I think it's important for us to pause and say, well, what is the opportunity for us? Because to some degree, we're reestablishing and remaking our relationship with the students. It's not the same as it was every year. You've got 5 different teachers that you have to meet, get to know, and then a year later, it's going to be another 5 different teachers. Right now, nobody remembers what school is like. And and none of us are really trying to reproduce what it was like to begin with. And so, so take advantage of the fact that these kids are also so hungry and desperate for interaction, stimulation, contact, curiosity, joy, and try to capitalize on that right now, because this is a unique moment for that. Also, I don't know when this is supposed to end. and so I'm gonna have to perform some self-moderation here and say thank you for listening. My email is up there, and you can feel free to contact me with that. If you send me an email, I'll send you a link to some of Paula's work, and I will also make sure that I talk to Katie Palenkas, and then we schedule Paula to provide some conversation with us as soon as possible, and that everybody in the ecosystem knows about that. But thank you for putting up a kind of a rough presentation. This was a great way to get back into around doing conference stuff, and I appreciate the work you're all doing, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. So one thing that I want to things that post Facebook groups where they continue to communicate, because you guys obviously are really creating relationships with the students and mentors. So that would be something. But then also another idea is like as part of your onboarding process, we do some really checking. Just like make sure like as they sign up that we are checking in with them, or the director checking in with them here.